Right, so picture this. You're the Chancellor of the Exchequer. You're supposed to be handling the nation's purse strings, balancing budgets worth billions, and somehow, you can't manage to get a £900 license sorted for your rental property. And when you get called out on it, the whole thing explodes into an absolute car crash on live telly. Rachel Reeves found herself in the hot seat during question time. And let me tell you, what followed was nothing short of political theatre at its absolute finest. Conservative MP Graham Stuart didn't just ask questions, he brought receipts, and the entire exchange descended into chaos so spectacular that even presenter Fiona Bruce got dragged into the crossfire. This wasn't your typical parliamentary back and forth, this was blood sport, and someone forgot to bring their armour. Quick favour, if you're loving this, hit that subscribe button. Over 92% of viewers haven't yet. It's free, takes a second, and means the world to us. Cheers if you did. Now back to the show. Let's set the scene properly, shall we? Question Time, that beloved BBC institution where politicians, journalists and members of the public gather to debate the pressing issues of our time. Fiona Bruce at the helm, audience ready for fireworks, panel assembled. The topic was supposed to be about the accidental release of a sex offender and whether Justice Secretary David Lammy should carry the can for it. Serious stuff, important stuff, but Graham Stuart had other ideas. He had a bone to pick, and that bone was shaped exactly like Rachel Reeves' rental property debacle. And honestly, you can't blame the man when the person responsible for the entire country's finances can't even handle their own landlord paperwork. Someone needs to ask the awkward questions. So Stuart goes in and he doesn't tiptoe around it. He lays it out plain as day. The Chancellor of the Exchequer committed a criminal offence in collecting rent for a year without getting a licence. Now let's pause there for a second, because that word criminal, that's not parliamentary language. That's not political spin. That's a straight up accusation. And he doesn't stop there. He points out that Reeves first claimed she didn't know about the licence requirement. Didn't know. The woman who's meant to know every tax code, every financial regulation, every economic policy detail, apparently had no idea she needed a £900 license to rent out her own house. But wait, it gets better. Turns out, not one, but 2 letting agents had actually told her she needed it. 2! So either she's got the memory of a goldfish or someone's not being entirely honest about what they knew and when they knew it. Now here's where things get properly spicy. Fiona Bruce tries to rein it in. She interrupts Stuart with a hang on, because apparently the show's gone off topic. They're meant to be discussing David Lammy and the justice system, not Rachel Reeves' rental property adventures. Fair point, Fiona, but here's the thing about live television. Once you've let the genie out of the bottle, you can't exactly stuff it back in. Stuart's on a roll, the audience is hooked, and nobody wants to go back to the scheduled programming. This is what people tune in for. This is the good stuff. But then Fiona makes a critical error. She says something that sounds an awful lot like she's defending Reeves. She mentions that the estate agent basically said it was their fault. Now, whether she meant it as a defense or just as a statement of fact, that's how Stuart heard it and that's how it came across. And that's when this whole thing goes from heated debate to full-blown confrontation. Stuart fires back with the legal reality. By law, the landlord is responsible, not the estate agent. It doesn't matter what the agent said or didn't say, what they did or didn't do, the legal obligation sits squarely on the property owner. That's Rachel Reeves. And then he drops the hammer. How is it that anyone in this audience would be prosecuted for a crime, but if you are the Chancellor of the Exchequer, apparently even you at the BBC are saying, oh no, it was someone else's fault. They just broke a rule. Boom. That's the line that cuts through everything, isn't it? Because he's absolutely right. If you or I failed to get the proper license for our rental property and collected rent illegally for a year, we'd be facing prosecution. We'd be getting letters from the council, potential fines, possibly worse. But when you're the Chancellor, suddenly it's an inadvertent mistake. Suddenly there are excuses, explanations, people lining up to share the blame. The rules apparently have a bit more flex when you're at the top of the political food chain. Fiona's not having it though. She snaps back with, please do not put those words in my mouth. And honestly, you can hear the frustration in her voice because she's trying to moderate a discussion that's now become a discussion about her and her alleged bias. She's gone from presenter to participant, and that's never where you want to be when you're supposed to be the neutral voice in the room. But Stuart doesn't back down. He comes back with, we all heard what you said, Fiona. It's a direct challenge right there on live television. He's essentially saying, you can protest all you want, but the audience isn't deaf. They heard you defending her, and now you need to own it. This is the moment where the whole thing becomes less about Rachel Reeves' rental property and more about media bias, about how the establishment protects its own, about whether there's one rule for the political elite and another for everyone else. It's bigger than a missing license. It's about accountability, or the apparent lack thereof. And the audience is eating it up because these are the conversations people are having in their living rooms, at their kitchen tables, in the pub. Why does it seem like politicians can get away with things that would land ordinary people in serious trouble? Now let's talk about the actual facts of the case because they're genuinely staggering. Rachel Reeves owns a property in Dulwich, southeast London. Lovely area, very nice houses, the sort of place that properties don't come cheap. She was renting it out for £3,200 a month. Let that sink in for a second. £3,000 a month. That's nearly £40,000 a year in rental income, and she couldn't find 900 quid to get the proper licence. Southwark Council, like many London boroughs, requires landlords to obtain a licence under the 2004 Housing Act. It's not new legislation, it's not some obscure rule buried in the footnotes, it's standard procedure and it's been around for 2 decades. But here's where the story gets even messier. Reeves initially told the Prime Minister she wasn't aware a licence was necessary, just straight up didn't know, which is baffling because ignorance of the law isn't a defence for anyone else, so why should it be for the Chancellor? But then the lettings agency involved in her rental arrangements came forward and said, actually, we did tell her she needed a licence. They contradicted her claim directly. One of the agents, Martin, let's call him Martin because apparently he's the brave soul willing to speak truth to power, said they had indeed informed Reeves about the licence requirement. They even offered to help with the application process, though they clarified it wasn't their responsibility to apply on behalf of clients. The onus was on the landlord, on Rachel Reeves. So now we've got a situation where the Chancellor's version of events doesn't match the agency's version of events, and someone's clearly not telling the whole truth. Martin went on to say that their clients, that's Reeves and her family, would have been under the impression that a licence had been applied for, which suggests there was a communication breakdown somewhere along the line, or someone wasn't paying attention to the paperwork, or maybe someone just assumed it would all sort itself out without actually checking. None of these scenarios make the Chancellor look particularly competent, do they? If you're entrusting someone to manage the nation's economy, you'd quite like them to be on top of their own financial and legal obligations. To her credit, and let's give credit where it's due, Reeves did eventually write another letter to the Prime Minister accepting full responsibility. She said, I accept it was our responsibility to secure the licence, and I am sorry about this matter and accept full responsibility for it. Which is the right thing to say, absolutely. Taking accountability is important, but here's the problem. It feels a bit late, doesn't it? It feels like damage control after getting caught rather than genuine contrition. Because the first letter tried to shift some of the blame, tried to suggest she didn't know, tried to make it sound like an honest oversight that anyone could have made. It was only after the lettings agency came forward with their side of the story that suddenly it became, yes, okay, it was entirely our fault. And this is what drives people absolutely mad about modern politics. It's not necessarily the mistake itself. People understand that mistakes happen, paperwork gets overlooked, things slip through the cracks. What infuriates people is the initial attempt to dodge responsibility, to minimize, to blame others, and only when you're backed into a corner with nowhere else to go, then you finally admit fault. It's the equivalent of a child saying, I didn't eat the Booksits while they've still got chocolate around their mouth, and only confessing when you show them the empty tin. Graham Stuart tapped into that frustration brilliantly during the question time exchange. He wasn't just attacking Reeves on the specifics of the licensing issue, though that was certainly part of it. He was highlighting a broader pattern of behaviour where politicians seem to operate by different standards than ordinary citizens. You break a rule, there are consequences. A politician breaks a rule, well, it was inadvertent, it was a mistake, someone else should have reminded them. Let's all move on, shall we? The lack of real accountability is what grates. And when Fiona Bruce appeared to defend Reeves, even if that wasn't her intention, it confirmed what a lot of people already suspect about the BBC and media institutions more broadly, that they're too cosy to power, too willing to offer cover for establishment figures, too quick to find excuses rather than asking the hard questions. Whether that perception is fair or not is debatable, but it exists, and Stuart exploited it perfectly. He turned the spotlight on herself, making her part of the story, suggesting that even the supposedly impartial presenter was running interference for the Chancellor. The beautiful irony of all this is that Rachel Reeves is meant to be the person cracking down on tax avoidance, closing loopholes, making sure everyone pays their fair share. She's positioned herself as someone who's going to make the system fairer, who's going to ensure the wealthy can't dodge their obligations. And yet, here she is, having collected rent illegally for a year without the proper license, only sorting it out after getting caught. It's not quite tax avoidance, but it's the same sort of thing, isn't it? Rules that apply to everyone else, somehow not applying to you until someone forces the issue. The optics are absolutely terrible. What makes this whole situation even more remarkable is how it escalated.
This wasn't some carefully planned political ambush. This was a live television debate that went completely off the rails because one MP decided to bring up an uncomfortable truth that nobody else wanted to discuss. The show's producers wanted to talk about David Lammy and the justice system. Fiona Bruce tried to keep things on track, but Stuart had other ideas, and once he started pulling on that thread, the whole thing unraveled spectacularly. That's the beauty and the danger of live television. You can't control it, you can't edit it, and when things go sideways, everyone's watching. The audience reaction during all this must have been something to behold. Question time audiences are usually fairly vocal. They're not shy about making their opinions known, and you can bet they were lapping this up, because this is the kind of confrontation that cuts through the usual political waffle. No prepared statements, no carefully crafted sound bites, just raw, unfiltered conflict playing out in real time. Stuart versus Reeves, Stuart versus Bruce. Everyone scrambling to either defend their position or attack someone else's. Brilliant telly, absolutely awful for everyone involved.